In the merciless frontier of 1880s Wyoming, a blind widow staggers through the darkest night of her life. Cast out by neighbors who saw her as nothing but a burden, Sarah Thorne battles a raging storm that threatens to claim her last breath. Rain lashes against her skin as thunder rolls across the endless prairie, her trembling fingers reaching into empty darkness. Miles away, wealthy rancher James McCullough rides through the tempest, his instincts honed by years on these untamed lands. Through sheets of rain, he spots a figure crumpled in the mud, a sight that will forever change two lives. What mysterious force drew him to that exact spot on this storm-ravaged night? Could fate have orchestrated this moment of grace? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years earlier, Sarah Thorne had watched the world slowly fade away, like a painting left too long in harsh sunlight. The doctor's certificate lay on her lap, its official letterhead and careful script confirming what she'd feared. Her vision was deteriorating, and nothing could be done to stop it. Thunder Creek had seemed different then. The settlement of barely 200 souls, nestled in Wyoming's vast expanse, had been her home for 15 years, ever since Thomas brought her here as a bright-eyed bride. The wooden boardwalks that lined Main Street, the cheerful ring of the general store's bell, and Mrs. Patterson's prize roses had all been familiar friends. Thomas had been her anchor through those early days of diagnosis. "We'll face it together, my love," he'd whispered, his calloused hand gentle against her cheek. A lifetime of working the small farm they'd carved from the wilderness had made his touch rough, but his heart remained tender. Each morning, as her sight dimmed further, he'd guide her hands over their modest home's surfaces, helping her create a map in her mind. But fate had other plans. The winter of '82 took Thomas, along with 3 other men, when they tried to rescue the Peterson family's cattle from a sudden blizzard. Sarah had still been able to see shapes and shadows then, enough to recognize the grim faces of the search party when they brought his body home. The town's sympathy lasted exactly 8 months, long enough for them to help her sell the farm, move her into a small room behind the church, and begin viewing her as a burden rather than a neighbor. With each passing season, as her world became darker, so did the whispers behind her back. "Poor thing," they'd say, loud enough for her to hear. "Can't even thread a needle anymore. Taking up space in God's house. And what does she contribute? Reverend Morris says she's eating through the church's winter fund." Sarah learned to hold, her head high, even as she felt their stares. Her fingers, now more sensitive than ever, kept busy with what work she could find, mending by touch, sorting dried beans for the general store, anything to prove her worth. But in a frontier town where survival demanded every hand pull its weight, her efforts seemed to count for less with each passing day. The medical certificate, yellowed now with age, remained tucked in her Bible. A reminder of how quickly life could change, how mercilessly fate could reshape a person's world. Yet even as Thunder Creek turned its back on her, Sarah refused to bitter. Thomas had taught her better than that. The town council notice arrived on a Tuesday, carried by Reverend Morris himself. Sarah knew it was bad news by the way his boots scraped against her floorboards, how he cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. Though she couldn't see the document, its presence felt heavy in the room, like storm clouds gathering before rain. "It's been put to a vote, Sarah," the Reverend said, his usually confident voice wavering. "The council feels, well, with winter approaching and resources being what they are." Sarah sat perfectly still in her rocking chair, hands folded in her lap, face turned toward the window where she could feel afternoon sunlight warming her skin. "Please speak plainly, Reverend. The Lord knows I've never had much patience for dancing around difficult truths." "You have to leave, Sarah. The church chamber isn't meant for permanent residence, and the winter fund, well, we need it for emergency cases." "Am I not an emergency case, Reverend?" Her voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened around each other. A blind widow with nowhere else to go. The council suggests reaching out to your sister in Ohio. Surely she could. My sister died of fever 2 years ago. I told you this when you read me her letter. The words came out sharper than she intended, and Sarah took a breath to calm herself. Who signed the notice, Reverend? His boots scraped again as he shifted uncomfortably. All 12 council members, including Mrs. Peterson. That stung more than Sarah expected. Ellen Peterson had been her closest friend once, their children playing together before the fever took Sarah's only son. Now she, too, had turned away. They're holding a town meeting tonight, Reverend Morris continued, to make it official. You should come. Make your case, perhaps. Sarah stood slowly, her fingers finding the familiar edge of her small table. No, Reverend, I won't beg for charity from those who've already decided my worth. She moved with careful dignity toward the door, opening it with practiced ease. Please tell the council I understand. I'll be gone by tomorrow evening. But they didn't even give her until evening. The town meeting, held in the stuffy confines of the general store, turned ugly fast. Sarah sat in the back, listening as neighbors, who she'd known for years, spoke of her as if she were livestock to be disposed of. Winter's coming early this year, Marcus Wheeler, the general store owner, declared. We can barely feed our own. She's been nothing but a drain, another voice added. Can't even help with the harvest. My Judith saw her drop 3 eggs last week. Mrs. Patterson chimed in. Good eggs wasted. Sarah felt each word like a physical blow, but kept her spine straight, her unseeing eyes fixed ahead. When she finally stood to speak, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I've lived among you for 18 years, she began, her voice clear and strong. Celebrated your weddings, mourned your losses, shared what I had when times were lean. My Thomas died saving your cattle, Mr. Peterson. My boy is buried in your churchyard. I'm not some stranger seeking handouts. But she could feel the hardness in the room, the way mercy had frozen over like a winter pond. Before she could continue, thunder rolled outside, making the windows rattle. Storm's coming, someone muttered. Better wrap this up. The vote was quick and unanimous. Sarah was to leave immediately, storm or no storm. Ellen Peterson, in what she probably thought was kindness, pressed a small bundle of food into Sarah's hands. For the journey, she whispered, shame evident in her voice. As they led her to the edge of town, rain already beginning to fall, Sarah thought of the council notice, probably still sitting on her small table. Such a simple piece of paper, yet it held the power to erase 18 years of belonging. The first heavy drops of rain hit her face, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. The road east leads to the next settlement, Reverend Morris called out, already retreating from the worsening weather. God be with you, Sarah. But Sarah knew God wasn't in the paper that condemned her, or in the voices that cast her out. If he was anywhere, he was in the storm itself, testing her faith as he had tested Job's. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and Sarah Thorne took her first steps into the darkness, away from everything she had known, into a night that seemed to have no end. 20 miles outside Thunder Creek, James McCullough stood at his study window, watching storm clouds gather over the vast expanse of his ranch. The deed to Circle M Ranch lay open on his mahogany desk, its edges worn from the countless times he'd unfolded it over the past decade. Each time he touched it, he remembered the day he'd earned enough to buy this land outright, the culmination of 15 years of back-breaking work, smart investments, and careful planning. At 45, James had built something substantial. From nothing, the Circle M sprawled across 5,000 acres of Wyoming's finest grazing land, its boundaries marked by crystal-clear streams and natural rock formations. The main house, a 2-story structure of solid timber and local stone, stood as testament to his success, though its rooms echoed with an emptiness no amount of wealth could fill. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the framed photographs he kept turned face down on his desk. 10 years had passed since influenza took his wife, Catherine, and their unborn child, but some wounds never fully healed. He'd thrown himself into expanding the ranch afterward, channeling his grief into work until Circle M became one of the territory's most prosperous operations. The first fat drops of rain hit the window glass as James studied the deed's elegant script. His father, a Boston accountant who'd never understood his son's westward dreams, had warned him he'd die broken and alone in this savage wilderness. Now, watching his ranch hands hurry to secure the property against the approaching storm, James felt a familiar mix of pride and melancholy. He'd proven his father wrong about success, but perhaps right about ending up alone. Thunder rumbled closer as Hank, his foreman of 8 years, appeared at the study door. "Begging pardon, Mr. McCullough, but them new cattle we bought from the Davidson spread are spooked by the storm. Might need an extra hand getting them settled." James nodded, already reaching for his oilskin coat. At 45, he still worked, alongside his men whenever needed, a habit that had earned him their loyalty as surely as fair wages had. The bay mare saddled? "Yes, sir, waiting in the barn, though it's fixing to be a nasty night for riding." Hank's weathered face creased with concern. "Could send the younger boys instead." "No need." James pulled on his coat, checking that the deed was secured in its drawer. "Those Davidson cattle cost more than most men make in a year. I'll see to them myself." The storm's electric charge had filled the air by the time James mounted up. His mare, a steady beast named Sugar for her, sweet temperament shifted nervously beneath him. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and ozone, along with something else, a heaviness that spoke of more than just bad weather. As he rode out, James found his thoughts turning to Thunder Creek. He avoided the settlement, when possible, disliking the way small towns bred small minds. His business took him to larger markets, Cheyenne, Denver, even Chicago occasionally. But tonight, something pulled his attention toward the distant lights of the frontier community. The deed's weight seemed to press against him from the drawer where he'd left it. He'd earned every acre of Circle M through honest work and careful stewardship, yet lately the success felt hollow, the achievements meaningless without someone to share them with. His ranch hands and foremen were good men, but they couldn't fill the deeper void that seemed to grow with each passing season. Lightning split the sky again, closer now, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that made Sugar dance sideways. James steadied her with practiced ease, squinting through the increasing rain. The storm was moving in faster than expected, driving dark clouds before it like cattle before a prairie fire. He should turn back. The sensible thing would be to return to his solid house with its warm hearth and well-stocked pantry. But something, instinct, providence, or perhaps just the restlessness that had driven him west all those years ago, urged him forward into the gathering darkness. Behind him, Circle M Ranch stood as a monument to one man's determination and grit. Ahead, through curtains of rain and flashes of lightning, lay an encounter that would challenge everything James McCullough thought he knew about success, solitude, and the true meaning of wealth. The storm unleashed its full fury as Sarah stumbled through the darkness. Her sodden prayer book, clutched against her chest, had long since ceased to provide any comfort. Each step was a battle against mud that sucked at her boots and wind that threatened to knock her off her feet. Without sight to guide her, the world had become a chaos of sound and sensation. Thunder that seemed to shake the very ground, rain that struck like needles against her skin, and the horrible certainty that each step might send her tumbling into some unseen ravine. "Our Father who art in heaven," she whispered, though the words were torn away by the wind. The prayer book's leather cover, worn smooth by years of daily devotions, felt like her last connection to a world that made sense. Thomas had given it to her on their 10th anniversary, having saved for months to afford the fine binding and gilt-edged pages. Now its pages were surely ruined, just like everything else she'd once held dear. Lightning split the sky, and though Sarah couldn't see its flash, she felt its electric charge raise the hair on her neck. The thunder that followed was immediate and deafening, sending her to her knees in the mud. Her fingers splayed in the muck, searching for anything solid to orient herself by. The small bundle of food Ellen Patterson had given her was long lost, probably scattered across the prairie like autumn leaves. "Please," she prayed, no longer sure if she was addressing God or simply the vast, indifferent night. "Please." Miles away, James McCullough fought his own battle with the elements. Sugar, his reliable mare, struggled against wind strong enough to steal a man's breath. The rain had soaked through his oilskin coat, and lightning made the horse nervous, but years of experience kept them moving forward. Something, call it instinct, providence, or the hand of God himself, urged him onward through the tempest. Through a brief break in the driving rain, James caught sight of something that didn't belong, a dark shape huddled against the fury of the storm. At first, he thought it must be a stray calf, or perhaps a wolf caught in the open, but as lightning flashed again, he saw it was a woman, kneeling in the mud, as if in desperate prayer. "Dear God in heaven," he muttered, already turning Sugar toward. The mare balked, sensing her rider's tension, but James pressed her forward. As they drew closer, he saw the woman was clutching something to her chest, her clothes plastered to her thin frame by the relentless rain. "Ma'am!" he called, out though the wind snatched at his words. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Sarah heard the voice but couldn't trust it. How many times in the past hours had the wind played tricks on her, making her think she heard wagon wheels or distant shouts? But then came the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, and a presence loomed over her, blocking some of the rain. "Ma'am, you'll die out here." The voice was closer now, deep and steady despite the storm's rage. "Let me help you." Sarah turned her face up, though she couldn't see who addressed her. I can't see," she managed through chattering teeth. "I'm blind, sir." James felt something twist in his chest at her words. The woman's unseeing eyes seemed to look right through him, yet there was a dignity in her bearing even as she knelt in the mud. Without hesitation, he swung down from his saddle, his boots sinking inches into the muck. "I'm James McCullough," he said, moving closer and crouching beside her. "I have a ranch nearby. Let me take you there, out of this storm." Sarah clutched her prayer book tighter, years of ingrained propriety warring with desperate need. "I couldn't impose." Another crack of thunder made the decision for them. Sugar reared slightly, and James had to steady her with one hand while keeping his balance in the mud. "Ma'am, this isn't imposition, it's survival. Now will you trust me?" Something in his voice, a mixture of authority and genuine concern, reached through Sarah's fear. She nodded, though the motion was barely visible through the rain. With gentle efficiency, James helped her to her feet. The prayer book slipped from her grasp, but he caught it before it could fall into the mud. "I've got your book," he assured her, guiding her hands to Sugar's saddle. Then, with strength born from years of ranch work, he lifted her onto the horse. As easily as if she were a child, Sarah felt the solid warmth of the horse beneath her, smelled leather and wet wool, as James mounted behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure circle that felt like the first safe harbor she'd known in years. "Hold on," he said, his voice close to her ear. "It's a rough ride, but I know these lands like my own heartbeat. We'll make it." As they set off through the storm, Sarah kept one hand pressed to the horse's mane, and the other clutched against her chest, where her prayer book had been. Behind her, James McCullough's solid presence guided them through the darkness. His confidence, never wavering even when lightning turned the world into stark contrasts of light and shadow. Through the pelting rain and howling wind, neither of them could have known that this desperate night would become the story told to their grandchildren. The night a storm brought together two souls who had forgotten how to hope. Sarah's prayer book, its pages swollen with rain and its leather cover stained by mud, would come to rest on a shelf in their home, no longer just a symbol of faith tested, but of faith rewarded. But that was all yet to come. For now, there was Only the storm, the night, and two people fighting their way through both toward a future neither could imagine. Dawn broke over Circle M Ranch, painting the sky in colors Sarah could no longer see but remembered in her heart. She stood in James McCullough's kitchen, her fingers carefully exploring the unfamiliar space. The old cast-iron cook stove radiated a warmth, and her hands found implements hanging from hooks, well-worn wooden spoons, heavy iron pots, copper-bottomed pans that spoke of years of use. "You don't need to cook," James had said when he'd shown her to the guest room the night before. But Sarah had heard the bachelor emptiness in his home, felt it in the layer of dust her fingers found on the windowsill, sensed it in the way his footsteps echoed through rooms too large for one person. "My hands remember," she said now, lifting a heavy skillet from its hook. The weight felt right, familiar. Before her sight failed, she'd run her own kitchen, fed harvest crews, preserved summer's bounty for winter's lean months. Blindness hadn't stolen those skills, only changed how she used them. The coffee tin sat exactly where James had described it. Third shelf up, second from the left. Sarah measured by touch and sound, the dark beans clicking against the tin cup. She used to count portions. Soon, the rich aroma of brewing coffee filled the kitchen, pushing back the lingering dampness from last night's storm. She heard James before he entered, boots on floorboards, a pause at the doorway. "You didn't have to," he began. "I know." Sarah turned toward his voice, keeping one hand lightly on the counter for orientation. "But I wanted to. There's eggs, too, if you'll tell me where they are." The silence that followed held a quality she'd learned to recognize, the struggle between courtesy and practicality. Finally, practicality won. "Basket by the window," he said, "gathered fresh yesterday." They fell into an awkward dance, James watching as Sarah navigated his kitchen with growing confidence. She counted steps between stove and counter, memorized the placement of every tool, noted how the floorboards creaked differently in each spot. When she nearly burned her hand on the stove's hot surface, James made a sound of concern. "I learned this lesson long ago," she assured him, showing how she used the heat's radiation to gauge distance. "Every tool teaches you if you listen properly." The ranch hands, arriving for their morning meal, brought new challenges. Sarah heard their boots scrape clean at the door, their murmured greetings mixing with curious whispers. But when she set platters of eggs and bacon on the long table, followed by a stack of hot biscuits, the whispers turned to appreciative murmurs. "Ain't had biscuits like these since my mama's kitchen," one weathered voice declared. "Mr. McCullough, you've been holding out on us," another added with a chuckle. Sarah felt James shift beside her. "Miss Thorne is a guest," he said firmly, "not a cook. But I'd like to be useful," she countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "I may be blind, Mr. McCullough, but I'm not helpless. Your kitchen tools tell me this is a working ranch. Every hand here earns their place. Let me earn mine." The silence that followed held weight, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Finally, James cleared his throat. "We'll talk after breakfast," he said, his tone softening the words. "For now, these biscuits deserve proper attention." Throughout the meal, Sarah stood by the stove, taking comfort in its solid presence as she listened to the sounds of appreciation, the scrape of forks, the easy banter of men who worked hard together. Each kitchen tool she'd used that morning had taught her something about this house, about its owner, about herself. The coffee pot, well used but meticulously maintained, spoke of James's attention to detail. The smooth wooden spoons, worn to silk by years of stirring, suggested patience, and the cast-iron skillet, perfectly seasoned, hinted at a heritage of care passed down through generations. As the men filed out to begin their day's work, boots thumping against the porch steps, Sarah began gathering dishes. She heard James rise, felt him approach. "You don't have to prove anything," he said quietly. Sarah's hand stilled on a plate. "Don't I? Your town, Thunder Creek, they cast me out because they saw only what I couldn't do. Will you do the same?" "No," he answered, and something in his voice made her wish, just for a moment, that she could see his face. "But I won't take." advantage of your gratitude either. Then let me propose a fair exchange, Sarah said, lifting her chin. Room and board for honest work. These tools know me, Mr. McCullough. They don't care that I can't see. They care only that I know their purpose and respect their use. The morning sun must have reached the kitchen window then, for she felt its warmth on her face. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, the first ray of hope she'd felt since the town council's notice had shattered her world. We'll try it, James said finally, for a week, but I have conditions. Name them. First, it's James, not Mr. McCullough. Second, you'll tell me if anything's too much. And third, he paused, and she heard him pick up one of the wooden spoons, turning it in his hands. Third, you'll join us at the table next time. A cook who stands apart isn't a cook. They're a servant, and that's not what you'll be here. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but blinked them back. Thank you, James. Don't thank me yet, he said, but she heard the smile in his voice. Wait until you've met Cookie, our regular cook. He's particular about his kitchen. Then his tools have taught him well, Sarah replied, running her fingers along the smooth edge of the counter. Because everything here speaks of pride and care. As James's footsteps faded toward the door, Sarah stood in the kitchen that might become hers, surrounded by implements that felt increasingly like old friends. Each one held a promise, of purpose, of dignity, of a place earned rather than given. Her fingers found the edge of her apron, and she squared her shoulders. She had a week to prove herself, and she would start by learning every inch of this kitchen until it knew her as well as she knew it. By the end of her first week at Circle M Ranch, Sarah had worn a path between the kitchen door and the herb garden, 32 steps, with a slight dip in the ground at 28. She counted each morning as she gathered fresh herbs, her fingers discriminating between the fuzzy sage leaves and smooth thyme with practiced ease. But venturing further remained a challenge, each uncertain step a reminder of her limitations. James watched her from his study window, noting how she'd pause at the garden's edge, head lifted as if testing the wind. He'd seen her stumble twice. Yesterday, and though she'd recovered with dignity, the sight had stirred something protective in his chest. That evening, after the ranch hands had retired and the kitchen was put to rights, he retreated to his workshop behind the barn. The piece of hickory he selected had been seasoning for 3 years, waiting for the right purpose. As his knife stripped away curls of wood, James remembered his grandfather's lessons about working with grain rather than against it. By lamplight, he shaped the staff, testing its balance, smoothing rough spots until the wood felt alive in his hands. Near midnight, Sarah heard boots on the porch and the soft knock that had already become familiar. "Come in," she called, setting aside her mending. "I've brought you something," James said, and she heard the uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. He crossed the room, his steps measured, and placed something long and smooth in her hands. "It's a walking stick, but, well, it's more than that." Sarah's fingers explored the gift. The wood felt warm, alive, shaped with careful attention to detail. Near the top, her touch discovered carved notches at regular intervals. "These marks measurements," James explained, and she heard him settle into the chair across from her. "Each notch is exactly 6 inches apart. The texture changes every foot." His voice took on a teacher's patience. "Run your hand down slowly. Feel how the pattern shifts." She did as instructed, marveling at the subtle variations in the wood's surface. Smooth gave way to a gentle ripple, then to a diamond pattern, each transition precise and purposeful. "You made this?" "My grandfather taught me woodworking, said a man should know how to shape the world around him." He cleared his throat. "The bottom is capped with brass. You'll hear it tap on floorboards. Feel it catch on rough ground. And here," he guided her fingers to a spot just below the handle. "Your name, carved deep enough to feel." Sarah traced the letters, throat tight with emotion. No one had given her something so carefully crafted to her needs since Thomas's prayer. "Book, thank you," she whispered. "But why?" "Because you're not a prisoner in this house," James said simply. "I've watched you test your boundaries, count your steps. This ranch It's bigger than 32 paces to the herb garden. The next morning, Sarah stood at her usual spot by the garden's edge, the walking stick planted firmly beside her. The sun warmed her face as she listened to the ranch awakening, horses nickering in the stable, screen doors slapping, boot heels on wooden planks. But today, instead of stopping, she extended the staff, letting it become an extension of her senses. 6 notches out, the ground sloped gently. At 12, gravel crunched under the brass tip. She moved with growing confidence, building a map in her mind with each step. The stick warned her of dips and rises, while the textured sections helped her track distance. By mid-morning, she had reached the chicken coop unassisted, collecting eggs with quiet triumph. James found her there, talking softly to the hens as she worked. He paused, watching how naturally she used his gift, how it had already become part of her movement. When she straightened and turned unerringly toward the sound of his boots, a smile curved her lips. "The barred rocks are laying well," she reported, basket balance confidently on her hip. "But that young cochin hen needs watching. Her eggs are getting smaller." He blinked, impressed. "You can tell the hens apart by voice and where they roost. Birds are creatures of habit." She tapped the walking stick lightly against a post. "Like people, we all need our markers in the world." Something shifted in James's chest. Admiration, certainly, but also a deeper recognition. He'd crafted the staff, thinking to help her navigate physical space, but watching her now, he realized she was teaching him about different ways of seeing, of knowing. "The hands are breaking for coffee soon," he said. "Walk back with me." Sarah's smile deepened. "Lead on, Mr. McCullough, or better yet," she extended her free hand, an offer and a challenge. "Walk beside me." As they made their way back to the house, James found himself matching his stride to hers, the walking stick marking their passage with soft taps. The ranch hands, watching from the corral, nudged each other and grinned, but James paid them no mind. His attention was on the woman beside him, who had taken his gift of crafted wood and turned it into something more, a bridge between their worlds, a key to independence, and perhaps, though neither would say it yet, the first thread of a bond stronger than either had dared to hope for. The package from Chicago arrived on a crisp autumn morning, wrapped in brown paper and string. James brought it to his study, where Sarah sat near the window, her fingers moving across the raised dots of her prayer book's cover, one of the few things she'd saved from her previous life. "What you said last week," James began, setting the package on his desk, "about wanting to understand the ranch's operations. It got me thinking." The paper crackled as he unwrapped it, revealing several leather-bound ledgers and a curious metal instrument with a pointed stylus, a braille slate and stylus, Sarah breathed, recognizing the distinctive sound of metal on metal. "But how did you—" "Wrote to a school for the blind in Chicago." James cleared his throat, suddenly uncertain. "The letter you dictated to your sister. You mentioned learning braille before your sight was completely gone. I thought perhaps—" Sarah rose, walking to the desk with the confidence of someone who had memorized every step. Her hand found the slate, fingers tracing its familiar pattern of cells. "I never had my own," she said softly. "The missionary who taught me could only visit once a month. But yes, I learned. Then these are for you." James pushed the ledgers forward. "Blank now, but I thought you might help me. Keep the ranch accounts. God knows I'm behind on them more often than not." Sarah's fingers trembled as they explored the fine leather bindings. "You'd trust me with your accounts?" "I trust you with my home," James replied simply. "The accounts seem a small matter in comparison." Over the next hours, they developed their system. James would read figures aloud, cattle sales, grain purchases, wages paid, while Sarah carefully punched each number into the ledger using the slate and stylus. Her fingers, sensitive from years without sight, created precise, even dots that she could read back with confidence. 200 head at $18 each, she repeated, her fingers skating across the page. That makes $3,600 from the Carter sale. James watched her work, amazed by the swift certainty of her movements. I've been doing this alone for 10 years, he admitted. Never thought to have a partner in it. The word partner hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah's hands stilled on the ledger. Is that what I am? A partner? What else would you call someone who knows every inch of my kitchen, can tell my cattle by their lowing, and now keeps my accounts? James moved closer, his voice softening. You've made yourself essential to Circle M, Sarah. Surely you know. That! She turned her face toward him, unseeing eyes bright with emotion, essential to the ranch or to its owner. Before James could answer, a commotion erupted from the yard, the sound of horses arriving at speed. Hank's voice carried through. The window, urgent and sharp. Mr. McCullough, riders coming in from Thunder Creek. The moment shattered. James straightened, moving to the window. 3 men, he reported tersely, looking official by their dress. Sarah's fingers clenched around the stylus. They've found me. No, James said firmly. They've found us. And we'll meet them together. He touched her shoulder gently. Unless you'd rather not. I spent too long hiding in shadows, Sarah said, rising with quiet dignity. These books show I have a place here, a purpose. Let them see that. They descended to the porch just as the riders reined in. Sarah stood slightly behind James's right shoulder, one hand resting on the porch rail, the other holding her walking stick. She recognized Reverend Morris's voice immediately. Mr. McCullough, the Reverend began, his tone carefully diplomatic. We've come about a delicate matter. Miss Thorne, James replied evenly, who is no longer your concern. The town council, another voice began, but James cut him off, has no authority here. Miss Thorne keeps my accounts, manages my household, and has earned more respect in 2 months than your council showed in years. His voice remained calm, but Sarah heard the steel beneath it. She stays. It's not proper, the third rider protested. An unmarried woman living among my reputation is not your concern, Sarah spoke. Up, her voice clear and strong. Nor is Mr. McCullough's. I am employed here, gentlemen. If you doubt my capabilities, she gestured toward the study window above. I'd be happy to show you the ranch accounts. Every figure accurate, every column balanced. A long silence followed, broken only by the creak of saddle leather as the men shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Reverend Morris cleared his throat. Perhaps we were hasty in our previous judgment. Perhaps, James agreed coldly. Now, unless you have business involving cattle or grain prices, I believe we're done here. As hoofbeats retreated down the drive, Sarah felt James turn toward her. You didn't have to face them, he said softly. Yes, I did. She smiled, touching the walking stick he'd made her. You taught me that, to shape the world around me, rather than let it shape me. Her hand found his arm, squeezed gently. Now, shall we finish those accounts? The day's only half done, and I believe we were discussing partnerships. James covered her hand with his own, and in that touch was understanding deeper than words. They climbed back to the study, where ledgers waited to be filled with numbers that meant more than mere sums. They were building something together, one careful mark at a time, creating a language of trust all their own. The attic door creaked open reluctantly, releasing the musty scent of stored memories. Sarah stood at the bottom of the narrow stairs, listening to James's footsteps above as he searched for additional ledgers for their growing accounting system. Found them. His voice drifted down, followed by the sound of something heavy being moved. Then, a sharp intake of breath and the distinct thud of something falling. "James!" Sarah called, already mounting the stairs with practiced care, her walking stick finding each step. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he answered, but his voice held an unfamiliar tension. "Just knocked over an old box." Sarah reached the attic landing, the floorboards solid beneath her feet. The air felt thick with dust, and something else, an emotion she could almost taste. James's breathing was uneven, and she heard the rustle of paper or perhaps photographs. he said quietly, answering her unspoken question. "I'd forgotten they were up here. Catherine, my wife. She loved taking pictures. Had one of those new Kodak cameras." Sarah moved carefully toward his voice, her stick finding a clear path through what she sensed was a maze of stored furniture and boxes. When she reached him, she heard him sink heavily onto what might have been an old trunk. "May I?" she asked, holding out her hand. A moment's hesitation, then the smooth surface of a photograph was placed in her palm. Her fingers traced its edges, found the slight curl of age at the corners. "It's our wedding day," James said, his voice rough with memory. "Catherine's wearing white, of course, standing in front of the house. It was newly built then. She's holding roses from her mother's garden in Denver." He drew a shaky breath. "She was 6 months pregnant when the fever took her. We'd already chosen names. Daniel for a boy, Elizabeth for a girl. I never learned which it would have been." Sarah cradled the photograph with the reverence it deserved, her thumb ghosting over its surface as if she could read the happiness captured there. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "She loved music, brought a piano with her from Denver. It's still in the parlor, though nobody's touched it in years. Used to play in the evenings, said it helped the crops grow." A quiet laugh, tinged with pain. "She named all the cattle, drove my foreman crazy trying to keep track of which one was Daisy and which was Buttercup." Sarah's hand found his shoulder, felt the tension there. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted. "I haven't spoken of her in so long. Sometimes I fear I'm forgetting the small things, the way she hummed while baking, how she insisted on wearing her best dress to Sunday dinner even out here." In the wilderness, more photographs rustled as James sorted through them. "Here's one from the day we finished the barn. Catherine sitting on the top beam, skirts gathered up, laughing at me for being nervous about her climbing so high." His voice caught. "She was fearless. Said God gave us this life to live fully, not to hide from heights or storms or love." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, remembering Thomas's similar spirit. "My husband used to say that too, that life was meant to be embraced, not endured." "Tell me about him," James asked quietly. "Thomas was solid, like an oak tree with deep roots. He loved this land, even when it was cruel. Would come in from working the fields covered in dust, but grinning, like a boy." She smiled at the memory. "When my sight began failing, he described the sunset every evening, painting it with words so I'd never forget the colors." They sat together in the dust-moted afternoon light, surrounded by captured moments from their past lives. James continued to describe the photographs. Catherine feeding chickens in a calico dress, standing proud beside her first garden harvest, laughing in the snow during their first winter. "The last one was taken 3 days before she fell ill," he said finally. "She's holding the new camera, trying to teach me how to use it. I never did learn properly." He placed the stack of photographs carefully back in their box. "I kept the camera too, though it hasn't seen light in years." Sarah's fingers still held the wedding photograph. Would you like me to help you organize these? We could get proper albums, and you could tell me about each one, so the memories—" "Stay alive?" James covered her hand with his, both of them now touching the captured moment of his past happiness. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Catherine would have liked you, you know. She believed in giving life second chances. Thomas would have approved." "Of you too," Sarah replied. "He always said the measure of a man was how he helped others stand tall." The afternoon light began to fade, but they remained in the attic, sharing gentle stories of the loved ones they'd lost. The photographs lay between them like bridges connecting their past grief to their present understanding. And if their hands remained linked over that wedding picture longer than necessary, neither felt the need to mention it. When they finally descended from the attic, the ledgers temporarily forgotten, something had shifted between them. Grief shared became grief halved, and in the space left behind, something new had room to grow. The photographs would find their way into albums over the coming weeks, each one carefully preserved with stories spoken into the quiet evening hours. But more than images were being preserved, they were learning that hearts, like photograph paper, could be exposed to light again without shattering. The music box appeared during their cleanup of Catherine's old piano bench. Sarah's fingers found it tucked in a back corner, a small wooden cube, its surface smooth from years of handling. When she lifted the lid, a delicate melody filled the parlor, notes tinkling like drops of rain on a tin roof. "Strauss," James said softly from across the room. "The Blue Danube. It was Catherine's favorite." His voice drew closer. "She used to wind it up every evening while she practiced her piano pieces." Sarah cradled the box, feeling the mechanism vibrate gently against her palms. The tune stirred something in her memory. "We danced to this at our town social. The night," Thomas proposed. "He had 2 left feet, but such enthusiasm." She smiled at the recollection, then realized James had gone very quiet. The music box played on, filling the silence between them with its sweet mechanical waltz. Finally, his voice came from directly in front of her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Thorne?" Sarah's heart skipped. It's been years, and without being able to see, trust me." His hand touched hers, warm and certain. "I may not have your husband's enthusiasm, but I do know which foot goes where." Setting the music box carefully on the piano, Sarah allowed James to guide her to the center of the room. His hand settled at her waist, respectful but sure, while hers found his shoulder. The height difference was just right. Her head could have rested perfectly against his chest, though she kept a proper distance. "Small steps," he murmured. "I'll guide you." They began to move, tentatively at first. Sarah marveled at how different it felt from dancing with Thomas, where her husband had been all eager energy. James moved with careful grace, each step deliberate and clear. She could read his intentions through the subtle pressure of his hand, the slight shift of his shoulder. "You're a natural at this," she said, surprised by how easily they found their rhythm. 6 months of lessons before my wedding," he admitted. "Catherine insisted, said no wife of hers would suffer a husband who couldn't waltz properly." Sarah laughed, the sound mixing with the music box's melody. "Thomas learned from his grandmother. She was French, apparently believed dancing was as essential as breathing. He used to say she'd roll over in her grave if she saw his attempts at a proper waltz." They turned slowly, Sarah's skirts swishing against James's legs. The familiar parlor. Air currents told her where they were in the room, passing the piano, approaching the window, gliding past the hearth. Her world, usually mapped through touch and sound, now expanded to include the gentle sway of their bodies, the whisper of fabric, the faint scent of leather and pine that she'd come to associate with James. "May I ask you something?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "Do you ever regret coming here? Not the circumstances that brought you, but staying?" Sarah considered the question as they moved through another turn. "I regret that it took losing everything to find this place," she said finally. "But no, I don't regret staying. Here, I'm not just poor blind Sarah or the widow Thorne. I'm essential," James finished, echoing his words from weeks ago in the study. "You're essential, Sarah." The music box's melody began to wind down, notes growing farther apart, but they continued to sway together, letting the rhythm live on in their movements. Sarah felt the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Propriety, warring with possibility, the past wrestling with the present. "James," she said softly, testing the sound of his name without its formal Mr. attached. "What are we doing?" "Dancing," he replied, but his tone suggested he understood her deeper question, and perhaps finding out that some gifts come disguised as storms. The music box gave one final crystalline note before falling silent. They stilled, but didn't immediately separate. Sarah could feel James's heartbeat through their joined hands, slightly faster than the waltz's tempo. "I should wind it up again," he said, though he made no move to do so. "We could just stay here," Sarah suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "Sometimes silence has its own music." His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against her waist. Not quite a caress, but more than a casual touch. "That it does." He agreed quietly, They stood there in the deepening evening, neither quite willing to break the spell the music box had woven. Outside, a whip-poor will began its evening song, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly in their pasture. The ordinary sounds of ranch life continued, but here in the parlor, time seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Sarah stepped back, letting her hands fall slowly from their dance position. But before she could move away entirely, James caught her. "Fingers in his, thank you," he said simply, "for the dance and for staying." Sarah squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Thank you for giving me somewhere worth staying." As she made her way back to the piano bench, her fingers found the music box again. Its mechanism had cooled, but she could still feel the echo of the waltz in her bones, could still sense the phantom pressure of James's hand at her waist. Some memories, she was learning, didn't need sight to be preserved perfectly. The letter arrived with the weekly supply wagon, sealed with the Thunder Creek Town Council's wax stamp. Hank brought it to the house with his usual mail delivery, but something in the foreman's manner caught Sarah's attention, a hesitation. In his step, a careful clearing of his throat. "Ma'am," he said, placing the mail on the kitchen table, "there's talk in town, ugly talk." Sarah's hands stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "About Mr. McCullough and me? Yes'm. Some folks can't leave well enough alone." Hank's boots scuffed against the floorboards. "Boss ought to see that letter first thing." The day stretched long as Sarah waited for James to return from the north pasture. Her fingers itched to open the letter, to know what new judgment Thunder Creek had passed, but she forced herself to focus on her tasks. By late afternoon, the kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh bread and beef stew, but her mind remained fixed on that sealed paper. James's arrival brought the crisp autumn air with him. "Something smells wonderful," he said, then stopped, short. "What's wrong?" "There's a letter," Sarah said quietly. "From the town council." She heard him cross to the table, heard the sharp snap of breaking wax. The rustle of unfolding paper was followed by a silence that stretched too long. "James! They've overstepped." His voice was tight with anger, far overstepped. Sarah moved around the table, her hand finding his arm. "Read it to me, please." James drew a deep breath. "Mr. McCullough, it has come to the attention of the Thunder Creek Town Council that you continue to harbor the widow Sarah Thorne in a manner unbefitting Christian propriety. While your charitable impulses do you credit, the arrangement has become the subject of considerable concern among God-fearing citizens. Reports of Mrs. Thorne's involvement in your business affairs, her presence at social gatherings, and her apparent authority over your household have raised questions about the nature of your relationship. Such irregular circumstances can only lead to scandal, damaging not only your own reputation, but the moral standing of our entire community. We strongly advise you to make alternative arrangements for Mrs. Thorne's care, perhaps at the Denver Home for Indigent Women, where her particular affliction can be properly addressed. Should you choose to disregard this friendly counsel, the council will be forced to consider more formal measures to protect the community's interests. You have until month's end to demonstrate your compliance. Yours, in Christian fellowship, the Thunder Creek Town Council. The kitchen fell silent, save for the bubbling of the stew pot. Sarah's fingers tightened on James's arm, feeling the tension thrumming through him. "Particular affliction," she repeated softly, as if blindness were a moral failing rather than God's will. "They have no right," James ground out. "No right to dictate who lives under my roof or how I run my ranch. But they'll try." Sarah moved away, finding her way to the window. The setting sun warmed her face, though she couldn't see its light. "They've done it before, James. They'll whisper to your cattle buyers, speak carefully to your banking contacts, drop gentle hints to your suppliers. Let them try." His boot heels struck the floor sharply as he paced. "I have contracts in Chicago, connections in Denver. Thunder Creek isn't the only settlement in Wyoming. It's not just business they'll poison." Sarah turned back toward him. "What about your reputation? The respect you've earned? They're threatening everything you've built." "Everything we've built?" he corrected firmly. Or have you forgotten those ledgers upstairs? The improvements to the kitchen? The way even Cookie admits your stew is better than his? Sarah smiled despite herself, but sobered quickly. I won't be the cause of your ruin, James. The only ruin would be letting small-minded people dictate my choices. He moved closer. She could feel the heat of his presence. Unless you want to leave? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah thought of the past months. The walking stick that had given her independence, the ledgers that had given her purpose, the music box that had given her joy. She thought of James's quiet strength, his careful consideration, the way he'd built a world she could navigate without sight. No, she said finally, I don't want to leave, but I need to know you understand what you're risking. Your standing in the community, your business relationships, your... Sarah, his hand found hers, warm and calloused. I understood the risks. The night I brought you here, I understand them better now, and they matter even less. She turned her palm up, lacing her fingers with his. Then we face them together. Together, he agreed. And we'll start by writing a response that will make that council wish they'd never put pen to paper. Sarah straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. The ledgers will prove my role here is proper and necessary, and perhaps it's time to remind them that Christian charity doesn't require their permission. James's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the gesture saying more than words. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hint of winter. But here in the kitchen, with the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of joined hands, Sarah felt nothing but certainty. Thunder Creek had tried to break her once before. This time, she wasn't facing the storm alone. The sheriff's wagon arrived at Circle M Ranch just as the first snow of winter began to fall. Sarah heard the commotion from the study where she was working on the ledgers. Boots on the porch, urgent voices, the heavy tread of official business. Then Hank's rapid knock at the study door. "Boss," he called, voice strained. "Sheriff Davies is here, with Judge Monroe and—" He hesitated. "And Reverend Morris." James's chair scraped back. "Stay here," he murmured to Sarah. But she was already rising, her walking stick firm in her grip. "No," she said quietly. "Whatever this is, we face it together." They descended to find 3 men standing in the parlor, snow melting from their coats. Sarah felt the tension crackling in the air, heard the rustle of official papers. "James McCullough," Sheriff Davies began formally, "we have here a legal complaint, filed by the Thunder Creek Town Council on behalf of several concerned citizens." "What kind of complaint?" James's voice was dangerously calm. Judge Monroe cleared his throat. "Serious allegations, Mr. McCullough. Misappropriation of funds, manipulation of business records, exploitation of a vulnerable person." "That's absurd," James snapped. "Every transaction in our books—" "Our books?" the judge interrupted. "You mean the records you've allowed an unseeing woman to manage? Records that show suspicious variations from previous years?" Sarah felt James stiffen beside her. "Those variations reflect improvements to the ranch, expanded operations. Every figure can be verified." "Indeed?" Reverend Morris spoke for the first time. "And what of the witnesses who've seen Mrs. Thorne, handling large sums of money, writing checks, making decisions far beyond her capacity?" "My blindness doesn't affect my ability to think, Reverend," Sarah said sharply, "nor my ability to recognize sanctimony disguised as concern." "Nevertheless," Sheriff Davies cut in, "we have a sworn statement from Ellen Patterson claiming she observed Mrs. Thorne altering ranch documents, and another from Marcus Wheeler regarding irregular business practices." Sarah heard the crackle of papers as an official document was presented. Her fingers tightened on her walking stick as James read silently. "This is a legal notice," the judge explained, "requiring all ranch records to be surrendered for examination. Additionally," he paused significantly, "Mrs. Thorne is to be removed to protective custody pending investigation." "Like hell, she." "Will be," James growled. "Mr. McCullough," Reverend Morris's voice dripped false sympathy. "Surely you see this is for the best. Poor Sarah, in her condition, could easily be led to participate in impropriety. Without fully understanding—" "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted. Her voice rang clear in the parlor. "I understand that when James McCullough offered me shelter, Thunder Creek lost its power to control me. I understand that my competence threatens those who preferred me helpless. And I understand that this," she tapped the walking stick sharply against the floor, "this independence terrifies you." "Sarah," the Reverend began, but she continued relentlessly, "You speak of protection, but you mean prison. You cite concern, but you mean control. Well, I won't go back to being the poor blind widow you can safely pity. I'm the keeper of these books, Reverend. Every transaction, every calculation, every entry is my work. If you doubt their accuracy, test me." A heavy silence followed her words. Sarah felt James move closer to her, his shoulder brushing hers in silent support. "Judge Monroe," he said quietly, "I assume you've brought the previous year's records for comparison." Yes, we have them here." "Then let's settle this now. Sarah will demonstrate her knowledge of our current books, and you can compare the figures yourself. Unless," his voice took on an edge, "you'd prefer to explain to the Denver banking authorities why you're harassing one of their major account holders on the word of a small-town shopkeeper and a woman who cast Sarah out during a storm." More silence, broken only by the soft tick of the parlor clock. Finally, the judge spoke. "A demonstration would be appropriate. Though I must warn you, Mr. McCullough, if any irregularities are found—" "They won't be," Sarah said firmly. She moved to the study door with practiced ease. "Shall we begin with the cattle sales from September, or perhaps you'd prefer to examine the grain purchases for winter?" For the next 2 hours, Sarah proved her mastery of the ranch's finances. Her fingers flew over the raised dots in her ledgers as she quoted figures, explained variations, and calculated sums in her head. James watched the judge's face shift from skepticism to surprise to reluctant admiration. When the last comparison was made, Judge Monroe cleared his throat. The books appear to be exceptionally well kept, more detailed than in previous years, in fact. "And the complaints?" James demanded. "Will require further investigation before any action can be taken." The judge sounded distinctly uncomfortable. "Though given the evidence of Mrs. Thorne's obvious competence, the complaint will be withdrawn," Reverend Morris interrupted suddenly. Sarah heard something unfamiliar in his voice. Shame, perhaps. "It seems we may have misunderstood the situation." "You understood perfectly well," James said coldly. "You just didn't like what you understood. Now, unless you have a warrant for arrest or a valid court order, I believe we're done here." After the men departed, Sarah remained standing by her ledgers, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns of dots that had just saved them both. James's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said softly. "I was angry," she corrected. "All those years of their condescension, their pity, I wanted them to see." They saw. His hand squeezed gently. "But Sarah, this isn't over. They'll try something else." "I know." She turned to face him. "But we've shown them we won't be easily moved. And next time we'll be ready," he finished. Together, outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Thunder Creek's tracks to the ranch. But Sarah knew they'd return. The question was no longer if, but when, and what price they'd all pay for today's victory. In the pre-dawn quiet, Sarah sat at her desk, the braille slate cool beneath her fingers. The house slept around her, but sleep had eluded her since the confrontation 3 days ago. Each night, she'd heard James pacing in his study, reading letters from business contacts in Denver and Cheyenne. Each day brought whispers of more damage, a cattle buyer suddenly hesitant, a bank asking uncomfortable questions, suppliers delaying deliveries. The testament she was composing would be her last gift to him. Her fingers moved steadily across the paper, punching out words that cost her dearly. I, Sarah Thorne, being of sound mind, do hereby attest that James McCullough has acted with nothing but honor and Christian charity. Any irregularities in the ranch accounts are solely my responsibility, though I maintain they exist only in the imagination of those who would see evil where none exists. She paused, listening to the familiar creaks of the house settling. From her first night here, Circle M Ranch had spoken to her in its own language. The whisper of wind through window frames, the solid thump of the front door closing, the cheerful crackle of fires in well-kept hearths. She'd learned to love these sounds as she'd learned to love the man who'd created them. Furthermore, she continued writing, I assert that my presence here was never inappropriate, though those of small minds might think otherwise. Mr. McCullough offered shelter to a homeless woman out of Christian duty, nothing more. That I grew to love. Her fingers trembled on the slate, and she had to stop, breathe, begin again. That I grew to love this ranch and its work should surprise no one who knows the dignity of purposeful labor. My blindness has not prevented me from contributing to this household, nor has it dampened my gratitude for the opportunity to do so. Outside her window, the first birds began their morning songs. Soon the ranch would wake. Cookie rattling pans. In the kitchen, hands stomping boots on the porch. James's steady tread down the stairs. Her last morning here, though only she knew it. In conclusion, I hereby absolve James McCullough of any wrongdoing and take full responsibility for any damage to his reputation or business interests that my presence may have caused. I leave of my own free will, without coercion or ill feeling. What are you writing? Sarah startled. She hadn't heard James approach, hadn't realized dawn had broken. A letter, she said quietly. A testimony. His boots crossed the room slowly. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands fell still on the slate. You know I must. Hell I do. But his voice held more pain than anger. After everything we've built here, they'll destroy you, James. She turned toward him, wishing not for the first time that she could see his face. Already your business contacts are backing away. How long before the banks call in their notes? Before the cattle buyers take their business elsewhere? Let them try. I have resources, and a reputation that took years to build. Sarah stood, her fingers finding the familiar edge of the desk. A reputation I'm destroying simply by being here. James moved closer. She could feel the heat of him, smell the coffee on his breath. You think I care about reputation more than... He stopped abruptly. More than what, James? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, his hand found hers on the desk. Where would you go? There's a school for the blind in Denver. They sometimes need teachers. She tried to keep her voice steady. I could be useful there. You're useful here. His fingers tightened on hers. You're essential here. Am I? Sarah turned her palm up against his. Or have we just grown used to each other? Comfortable in our arrangement? Is that all this is to you? An arrangement? The pain in his voice nearly broke her resolve. You know it's not. But what we want doesn't matter. The world has rules, James. Lines that shouldn't be crossed. The world. He released her hand abruptly. Or Thunder Creek? Since when do you let them dictate your choices? Since their prejudice began threatening everything you've worked for. Sarah touched the testament she'd been writing. This will protect you, clear your name, let you rebuild. Damn my name. The raw emotion in his voice stopped her. Damn Thunder Creek and their small-minded gossip. You want to leave to protect me? What about protecting this? His hand caught hers again, pressed it against his chest where his heart beat strong and fast. What about protecting us? Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. There can't be an us, James, not without destroying everything else. Everything else means nothing without... He broke off again, and she heard him step back, gather himself. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. At least wait. Give me time to make arrangements, contact some people in Denver. If I wait, I'll lose my courage. Sarah found her walking stick, the one he'd carved for her all those months ago. Better to go now, clean and quick. Like ripping out stitches before the wounds healed? The bitterness in his voice cut deep. You're right about one thing. You're destroying something. But it's not my reputation. He strode from the room, boots striking the floor like physical. He blows. Sarah sank back into her chair, fingers finding the testament she'd written. All her reasons laid out in careful dots, each one as hard and cold as the truth they represented. But as she sat in the growing morning light, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch awakening, she wondered if truth alone was enough, if protecting someone meant destroying them in a different way, if safety was worth the cost of silence. Outside her window, a meadowlark began to sing. James found himself in the attic as the morning sun crept over the horizon, drawn to the box of Catherine's photographs like a man seeking absolution. But it wasn't the familiar images he sought this time. Behind them, wrapped in faded silk, lay his mother's locket, the last thing she'd given him before he'd left Boston for the frontier. The gold felt warm in his palm, the delicate engravings as clear as the day his father had it made. Inside, his mother's faded portrait smiled up at him, her eyes kind but determined. She'd understood him better than his father ever had, understood that his heart belonged to the open spaces and untamed possibilities of the West. Follow your heart, she'd whispered, pressing the locket into his hand. But remember, true love requires courage. Below in the kitchen, he heard the quiet sounds of Sarah preparing breakfast one last time. The thought of her leaving twisted in his chest. Like a knife, every rational argument supported her decision, his business interests, his standing in the territory, his reputation. But since when had love been rational? The sound of running boots on the stairs interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. McCullough," Hank's voice carried urgency. "Riders coming in from town. Looks like trouble." James tucked the locket into his vest pocket and descended to find Sarah standing in the parlor, face turned toward the window, hands tight on her walking stick. "How many?" he asked Hank. "Dozen or more." Marcus Wheeler leading them. Sarah took a step toward the door. "I should go, now, before—" "No." The locket pressed against his chest like a burning coal. "You're not running from them. Not again. James, please." Her voice caught. "Don't make this harder." "Make what harder?" He crossed to her, caring nothing for Hank's presence. "Letting them win, watching you sacrifice everything we've built because they're too small-minded to understand it?" "Boss," Hank interrupted, "they're carrying torches." A muscle ticked in James's jaw. "In broad daylight, they mean to burn us out?" "Just frighten us, I expect," Sarah said quietly. "Show everyone what happens when you defy Thunder Creek's morality." In judgment, the bitterness in her tone sparked something in James. Not anger, but clarity. His fingers found the locket in his pocket, traced its familiar contours. His mother had chosen love over Boston society's expectations, had weathered the whispers and cold shoulders to marry a man beneath her station. She'd shown him that some things were worth fighting for. "Hank," he said, not taking his eyes from Sarah's face, "get the men together. All of them, and send Tommy to fetch Sheriff Davies. Tell him if he wants to prevent bloodshed, he'd better ride fast." "Yes, sir." Hank's boots thundered down the porch steps. "James," Sarah started, but he caught her hands in his. "Listen to me. When I found you in that storm, I thought I was offering shelter to someone in need. I didn't know I was finding my own salvation. You've brought life back to this house, purpose to my days, joy I'd forgotten could exist. They'll destroy everything." "No," he interrupted, one hand moving to cup her cheek. "They can only destroy things, buildings, businesses, reputations. But what's between us? That's beyond their reach." She leaned into his touch, tears slipping from her sightless eyes. "I can't bear to be the cause of your ruin." "Sarah," he pressed the locket into her palm, "this was my mother's. Inside is the portrait of a woman who defied society to marry for love. She taught me that real ruin isn't losing status or money, it's losing your soul. And if I let you go, without fighting for us, that's exactly what would happen." Her fingers traced the locket's shape. What are you saying? I'm saying stay. Not as my housekeeper or accountant, not as a charitable duty. Stay as my wife. Sarah's breath caught. Outside, they could hear horses approaching, men's voices carrying on the morning air, the sound of ranch hands gathering to defend their home. They're almost here, she whispered. Let them come. James's voice was firm. Let the whole territory come. I've spent 10 years building this ranch, but you've shown me what it could be. Not just a successful business, but a true home. Stay, Sarah, stay and help me build something that will make even Thunder Creek see the power of love over prejudice. Her fingers closed around the locket. Your mother, she weathered the scandal. She thrived in it. Said proving people wrong was the best revenge. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. I suppose I've had some practice with that lately. The first shouts reached them from the yard. Marcus Wheeler's voice raised in righteous anger. Hank's steady response. The moment of decision had arrived. Well, James asked softly, what's your answer? Sarah straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with the quiet dignity he'd come to cherish. I suppose someone needs to keep your accounts in order. Her free hand found his chest, rested over his heart. And perhaps it's time Thunder Creek learned that love doesn't need eyes to see clearly. James pulled her close just as the first pounding came at their door. In his pocket, his mother's locket pressed between them like a promise, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are simply choosing love over fear, truth over convenience, and the hard right over the easy wrong. Together, he whispered against her hair. Together, she agreed, and in that word was all the future they could ever need. Thunder Creek's town hall had never seen such a gathering. The leather-bound record book on the clerk's desk would later show that every adult resident of the town was present that cold winter morning, drawn by rumors of scandal and the promise of righteous retribution. Sarah stood beside James at the front of the hall, her walking stick planted firmly on the wooden floor, her spine straight as a prairie fence post. The whispers that had followed their entrance reminded her of wind through dry grass, hostile, hungry, eager for fire to catch. Order! Judge Monroe's gavel cracked against wood. This emergency session of the Thunder Creek Town Council will come to order. Marcus Wheeler's voice rose above the settling murmurs. We demand immediate action against this immoral arrangement at Circle M Ranch. Immoral? James's quiet voice carried to every corner. What's immoral about offering shelter to someone in need? We all know it's more than shelter, Ellen Patterson called out. The way you parade her around, letting her manage your affairs. And why shouldn't she? James interrupted. Sarah's bookkeeping has increased ranch profits by 30% this year alone. Every figure verified by your own judge just days ago. The town clerk's pen scratched across the record book, documenting each exchange. Sarah could hear the rapid strokes, knowing these moments would be preserved for future generations to read. This isn't about business, Reverend Morris said heavily. It's about propriety, about the example we set, about control. Sarah's voice rang clear through the hall. About a town so afraid of difference that they'd cast out a blind widow rather than see her live independently. A shock of silence followed her words. In it, Sarah took 2 steps forward, her stick tapping against the floorboards. You speak of propriety, Reverend. Let's speak of Christian charity. When my sight failed, how many of you offered help? When Thomas died, how many brought comfort? You gave me 8 months of grudging tolerance before deciding I was too great a burden to bear. Now see here, Marcus Wheeler began. But Sarah continued, her voice strengthening. No, you see, Mr. Wheeler, that's what this is really about, isn't it? Seeing, you think because I can't see with my eyes, I must be blind to everything. Blind to your prejudice, your fear, your small-minded certainty that different means wrong. The clerk's pen raced across the page, recording every word. Sarah could hear the scratching pause occasionally as he dipped for more ink, determined to miss nothing. Mrs. Thorne, Judge Monroe interjected, your unfortunate circumstances are neither unfortunate nor circumstances, she cut in. My blindness is part of who I am, but it doesn't define what I can contribute. At Circle M Ranch, I found more than shelter. I found purpose, respect, and yes, she turned slightly toward James, feeling his solid presence beside her. I found love. The hall erupted in scandalized whispers. The judge's gavel cracked again. Love? Ellen Patterson's voice dripped disbelief. You can't mean... I mean exactly that. James stepped forward, his shoulder brushing Sarah's. I love Sarah Thorne, and I intend to marry her. Any who object can take their business elsewhere. Circle M Ranch will survive without Thunder Creek's approval. You'll be ostracized, Marcus Wheeler sputtered. No one will trade with you. No one? A new voice spoke from the back of the hall. Herbert Davidson, the largest cattle buyer in the territory, stood up. I've reviewed Mrs. Thorne's books myself, never seen cleaner figures or better organization. My business stays with Circle M, as does mine. Another voice, Samuel Chen, who supplied grain to half the territory. The ranch's efficiency has improved notably under her management. One by one, other voices joined in. Ranchers who'd worked with James for years, traders who valued reliability over gossip, families who remembered Sarah's kindnesses before her sight failed. The town clerk's pen flew across the pages, recording each declaration of support. Sarah felt the mood in the hall shifting like wind, changing direction before a storm breaks. Furthermore, James said into the growing quiet, any business that leaves Circle M over, this will find themselves explained in detail to the Denver Banking Association. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to learn that profitable relationships are being severed over personal prejudice. Judge Monroe cleared his throat. Mr. McCullough, surely we can reach some compromise? The only compromise I'll accept, James replied firmly, is Thunder Creek's acceptance of my future wife as she is. Blind, capable, and essential to both my ranch and my life. Sarah felt his hand find hers, squeezed gently. The clerk's pen scratched one final note, then fell silent, waiting. Into that silence, Reverend Morris stood slowly. Perhaps, he said, each word seeming to cost him, we have been less than Christian in our judgment, less than fair in our treatment of Mrs. Thorne, perhaps. Sarah's voice was quiet but carried clearly. You cast me out in a storm, Reverend, left me to die rather than accept my presence. And now you speak of being less than Christian. The silence deepened. Sarah could feel the weight of every eye in the hall, could sense the slow shift of consciousness as her words found their mark. The town records will show, she continued, that Thunder Creek chose fear over charity, judgment over mercy. But they will also show this moment, when you faced a choice between clinging to prejudice and embracing change. She lifted her chin, addressing the entire hall. I don't ask for your approval. I don't even ask for your acceptance. I ask only that you examine your hearts and ask yourselves, what would the God you claim to serve think of your actions? The clerk's pen scratched, once more recording her words for posterity. In the heavy silence that followed, Sarah felt the future balancing on a knife's edge, not just her future with James, but Thunder Creek's future as well. Would they choose to grow, to change, to see with more than just their eyes? The answer, when it came, would be recorded in that leather-bound book for generations to read and remember. The marriage license lay on Judge Monroe's desk, its official letterhead and formal language a stark contrast to the emotion filling the room. Sarah's fingers traced the raised seal in the corner, while James dipped the pen in ink, ready to sign. You understand, the judge said, his voice carrying a note of resignation, that this document makes history in Thunder Creek. Never had he paused, choosing his words carefully, never had such a unique union. You mean you've never had a blind woman refuse to know her place? Sarah's tone held more amusement than bitterness now. The past week had seen remarkable changes in Thunder Creek, as if her words in the town hall had broken some invisible dam. I mean, Judge Monroe replied, with unexpected gentleness, We've never had someone show us so clearly how blind we ourselves have been. James's hand found Sarah's shoulder. Where do we sign? The judge guided their hands to the proper spaces. First James's bold signature, then Sarah's carefully practiced one. As they signed, Sarah remembered the day James had spent hours helping her relearn to write her name. His hands steady on hers as she practiced the movements until muscle memory took over. "Witnesses?" the judge asked. "Right here," Ellen Patterson's voice surprised them all. She stepped forward, her skirts rustling. If you'll have me," Sarah turned toward her former friend's voice. "Why?" "Because I was wrong," Ellen's words caught slightly. "Because when Thomas died, I promised him I'd look after you. Instead, I let fear and foolishness turn me against my dearest friend. I'd like to make it right if I can." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she nodded. Ellen's pen scratched across the paper, followed by Hank's steady hand as the second witness. The ranch foreman had insisted on the honor, saying he'd known it would come to this from the first day Sarah had organized the ranch's chaotic kitchen. "Well then," Judge Monroe said, adding his own signature with a flourish, "by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, and with God as our witness, I now pronounce—" "Wait." Sarah held up her hand. "Before you finish, I'd like to read something. James." He pressed her prayer book into her waiting hands. She'd spent hours copying these words into Braille, wanting them to be perfect for this moment. "My dear friends," she began, her fingers moving smoothly across the raised dots. "Love, I have learned, is not about seeing with your eyes. It's about seeing with your heart. When I lost my sight, I thought I had lost everything, but God, in His wisdom, showed me that some things can only be seen clearly in darkness." She turned slightly toward where she knew James stood. "I cannot see your face, my love, but I know every line of it through touch. I cannot watch you move through a room, but I know your step, your presence, the way the air changes when you're near. I may be blind, but I see you more clearly than anyone else ever could, because I see you with my heart." A soft murmur ran through the gathered witnesses. Sarah continued, her voice strengthening. "To those who doubted this union, I say, look, not with your eyes, but with your souls. See how God works through what you call affliction to create something beautiful. See how love transforms weakness into strength, prejudice into understanding, fear into faith." Her fingers found the last lines. "And to my beloved James, I say this: you found me in darkness and brought me into light, not the light of sight, for that was never meant to be my path, but the light of purpose, of dignity, of love, freely given and joyfully returned. With this vow, I promise to be your eyes when you need them, your strength when you falter, your partner in all things until death parts us." As she finished, Sarah felt James's hand clasp hers, felt the slight tremor in his strong fingers that told her he was deeply moved. "Sarah," he said hoarsely, then had to stop and clear his throat. "Sarah, I had fine words prepared, but they seem hollow now compared to yours. So let me simply say this. You've taught me to see the world anew, to understand that true vision comes from the heart. I vow to be your strength when you need it, your guide when you ask for it, and your devoted husband for all our days." Judge Monroe cleared his throat. "Now then, if there are no further additions—" He paused, but the room remained respectfully silent. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss they shared was gentle, proper, yet filled with promise. As applause broke out, led, Sarah noted with joy, by Ellen Patterson's enthusiastic clapping, she felt James press something into her hand. Her fingers explored it, a small, warm piece of metal. "My mother's locket," he whispered. "Now yours, if you'll have it." "Always," she whispered back, "in darkness and in light." The marriage license would be filed in Thunder Creek's records, a testament to love's victory over prejudice. But the real triumph was in the changed hearts of those who witnessed it. In Ellen Patterson's tears of reconciliation, in Judge Monroe's newfound humility, in the way the town itself seemed to exhale, as if releasing a long-held breath. Sarah and James McCullough left the judge's office into bright winter sunshine. She couldn't see it, but she could feel its warmth on her face. Much like she could feel the warmth of acceptance finally replacing the cold shadow of judgment that had haunted her for so long. Spring came early to Circle M Ranch, bringing with it the sound of hammering at the front gate. Sarah stood on the porch, listening to James and Hank work, her hand resting on the new sign before they mounted it. Her fingers traced the freshly carved letters, McCullough and wife, Esther 1885. Below that in smaller text, all are welcome here. How's that for height? James called from the gate. Perfect, Sarah answered, knowing he wasn't just asking about the sign. Everything was perfect, the warm breeze carrying the scent of early wildflowers, the distant lowing of cattle, and the sound of wagon wheels approaching from town. The wagon brought Ellen Patterson and 3 other women from Thunder Creek's sewing circle, coming for their weekly gathering at the ranch. The change had started small. Ellen asking if she could bring her quilt work to share with Sarah, remembering how they used to sew together. Now the ranch's parlor hosted regular gatherings where sighted and unsighted hands worked together, sharing stories and slowly healing old wounds. Sarah, Ellen called as she descended from the wagon. You'll never guess, Reverend Morris's wife had her baby. A little girl born blind. Sarah's heart caught. How are they taking it? That's just it. They're coming to you for advice. The Reverend said, well, he said you're living proof that sight isn't the only way to see beauty in God's world. James's boots crossed the yard, coming to stand beside Sarah. She felt him take her hand, squeeze it gently. They both understood the significance of this moment. Not just a family seeking help, but a community learning to see differently. The new sign creaked slightly as Hank secured it, proclaiming to all who passed that Circle M Ranch had evolved into something more than just a cattle operation. It had become a place of transformation, where prejudices died and understanding bloomed like prairie flowers after rain. I think, Sarah said softly, we're going to need a bigger parlor. James chuckled, the sound warm with love and pride. I think you're right, Mrs. McCullough. I think you're right. 1 year later, James put the finishing touches on his most ambitious woodworking project yet. A rocking chair carved with symbols of their journey together. His fingers traced the patterns, rolling waves for the storm that brought them together, twining vines for growth and a rising sun for hope. Along the arms he'd carved braille messages of love that only Sarah could read. From her seat on the porch, Sarah listened to the afternoon bustle of what the territory now called the Circle, M School for Independent Living. 3 blind students from neighboring settlements practiced walking with canes crafted in James's workshop, while Ellen Patterson taught a young girl to read braille. In the kitchen, Cookie supervised 2 more students learning to navigate cooking. By touch and smell, ready for your chair, Mrs. McCullough. James's voice carried pride and love in equal measure. Sarah rose, one hand resting on her growing belly. Their child, due in winter, would be born into a world already changing, a world where difference wasn't seen as weakness, where love proved stronger than prejudice. As she settled into the rocking chair, feeling the smooth wood and meaningful carvings beneath her fingers, Sarah smiled. It's perfect, she said, knowing James would understand she meant more than just the chair. Everything is perfect. The chair creaked gently as she rocked, its sound mixing with the lessons, laughter, and life that now filled their home. Circle M Ranch had become exactly what they dreamed, not just a place of shelter, but a beacon